how exactly do you explain a personal experience? When I made my original video on Final Fantasy XI, that was the challenge I faced. I can explain how a game's mechanics work and how the design can lead to a satisfying experience. I can tell you how certain narratives can evoke an emotional response in the audience. But what I can't explain to you is the importance of a very personal experience that can never be replicated. Despite my best efforts, when I poured out my very soul regarding Final Fantasy XI 3 years ago, I still barely scratched the surface of the breadth of experience found in this venerable MMO. It's still difficult to explain the significance of leveling with a party in Valkyrie Dunes at 4 AM on a school night, and I still haven't found a way to accurately describe the feeling of stepping into Juno for the very first time. Even if that were possible, it still discounts the countless experiences I wasn't privy to. There is simply no video that I could make that could ever explain the personal significance that this game held in the lives of the many people who played it. So when this topic had managed to come up for Subscriber Appreciation Month, I was a bit daunted. What exactly would I talk about? I already talked about the game's history. Talking about the game's many narratives don't really portray the personal experience they hold in my own life. Discussing the game's myriad of level designs don't really mean that much unless you already consider Vanadale your home. I mean, I could just wax nostalgia, but believe it or not, despite me being a channel that focuses almost exclusively on retro games, I'm not really in the business of peddling nostalgia. I want everyone to be able to enjoy the videos I make, whether they're fans of the game or never even heard of them before. Even worse is the looming threat that someday there will ultimately not be a Vanadale to return to. While Final Fantasy XI has managed to secure an existence until its 20th birthday, it's difficult to say what the future holds after that. No one knows if the mobile port will capture the same experience, and that assumes it releases at all, and it's difficult to say whether private servers will effectively provide an alternative. Whether it's 2 years from now, 5 years, or even another 20 years, someday all that will be left of Final Fantasy XI is experiences and memories. Then, as I was returning home to Vanadale, that feeling of warmth and familiarity washing over me, how I was lamenting I couldn't just package this feeling and give it to you. I thought of an old adage: if you give a Mithra a fish, you'll give her a food effect for 5 minutes. But if you teach a Mithra to fish, well, you already spoiled her by giving her a fish, so you're just gonna have to keep feeding her, otherwise she's just gonna bug you. Not really an apt saying, admittedly. Regardless, I realized that the only way I could give interested parties this experience was to teach them how to experience it for themselves. Now, whereas I would just like to stop the video here saying that you should go play Final Fantasy XI, actually getting into Final Fantasy XI is rather difficult. 11 was made during a time when modern MMO conventions didn't exist, and in some instances can be nearly impenetrable by today's standards. Admittedly, it's pretty player hostile at some times, often giving you no direction on where to go or what to do. The assumption was that there would be a community to help you, with players speaking from their own experiences and helping you out. During the era of its release, that design worked surprisingly well and is what made Final Fantasy XI so unique. But nowadays, most of the community is in the end game, leaving the early game experience a bit rough for newcomers. I want to give back to the community that has given so much to me. However, since I can't exactly sit at the gates of Port Bastok waiting for anyone with a question mark to run by, asking if they need some help like some weirdo, I figured the best thing I can do is make a video about it. This is Gaining Experience, your guide into the forgotten, obscure, and weird side of gaming. And in this series, we're going to take a look at Squaresoft's first MMO, Final Fantasy XI. Now, if you want to play Final Fantasy XI but don't have it, we're gonna need to fix that. As much as I would like to say just install it from Steam, boot it up, and get started, the process is not that straightforward. So prepare for the hardest boss in the early game, the sign-up process. For better or for worse, Final Fantasy XI is a paid MMO, meaning it's both $30 to buy the game outright and features a $12.95 by month subscription fee. Despite it being almost 20 years old, there is no free-to-play model. Personally, I enjoy that because that means there's no microtransactions, but your mileage may vary. You do get a 30-day free trial, which, if you're diligent enough, should allow you to experience most, if not all, of 11's main stories, make it to the endgame, and explore some additional content in that month alone, barring the extremely grind-heavy Abyss Sea storyline. That said, Final Fantasy XI does go on sale a couple of times a year for less than $10, and does do somewhat regular free weeks as well, as long as you already have an account. If you're patient, you can basically play the game only paying for the game itself. You can also get a head start with a free 2-week trial period if you aren't sure you want to take the dive yet, though it is restricted to level 50 and only the base game, so you're locked out of quite a bit of content. And to save dozens of comments about it, yes, there are private servers that you can play without a subscription. And some of these servers actually attempt to replicate the old days of Final Fantasy XI, usually pre-Wings of the Goddess expansion. However, they aren't in the scope of this guide, but if you're interested, they aren't too hard to find. Still, I would say support FF11 by playing the main servers, not because I'm worried about any legality issue, but more subscriptions help keep Final Fantasy XI online, well, online. To note, you don't actually need to buy Final Fantasy XI to install it, just play it. And we can get the install files directly from the main website as we take care of the next steps. Just go to Final Fantasy XI's main website, the link in the description below, go to the download section and start grabbing the zips. While we're here, it's best to tackle the first phase of the boss. Trust me, it is a lot less stressful to make a Square Enix account now, as opposed to having already purchased it, then hit a wall. If you happen to be coming from Final Fantasy XIV, hey, you're in luck, you can use the same account. Otherwise, you just put your information and enter a confirmation code sent to confirm your email. If you got done with that with no problems, as Guile would say,
easy operation.
However, I'm willing to bet there was a good chance that you got the dreaded I-2501 error. PlayOnline is really picky about new accounts and billing. Supposedly this has something to do with you using a VPN, but I'm pretty sure it's just RNG. If you got this error, it means you have to wait a full day to re-register, try to register again with a new account name and email address, or get in contact with Square Enix customer service, which could also take longer than a day. Personally, I've had better luck signing up with my phone's browser to register. Once you finally got that done, this is just the first phase, so you might as well keep this page open as we move on to the next step. Now we need to actually get the game. Obviously, you don't really need the physical game since you're currently downloading it, but you will need a valid CD key. There are a few ways to get that. If you have Steam, you can grab it from there, and from your library, click on the Show CD Key function, and you're good to go. The second option is to buy it directly from the Square Enix store. That's pretty simple as well, though I noticed a slight delay from your purchase to actually getting the game. Your CD key will be located in your order history. Regardless of preference, it's still worth checking out both because both the SE store and Steam have separate pricing. Otherwise, you might miss out on a Vanna deal. Because, you know, Eleven's World is called Vanadale, and Dale kinda sounds like deal. So you got your key, and we're gonna take it to our Square Enix account and click on the Final Fantasy XI option. We input a bit more personal information and we're brought here. From here, we want to add new PlayOnline service account. We just copy our CD key like so, paste it, register it, and we're brought to this screen with our generated PlayOnline ID and a password for it. We can't change our ID, but we can change the password from the bottom of the options list, and I suggest that you do just that. We also need to create a character slot, and to do so, from here we want to select Add New Options under Character and select our payment method. If you are interested in providing credit card info for automatic renewal, I suggest selecting Krista, PlayOnline's digital currency. That way it won't charge you unless you have the amount of Krista in your account. You likely have other keys, but until we create our character, we can't do anything with them yet. Still, you might want to keep this page open because you'll be back to it at least one more time. So after all that's sorted out, it's time to get into the final phase of the boss fight, signing into the PlayOnline's launcher. When you go to add your account, you notice that there are no less than 3 different usernames requiring up to 4 potential passwords. This is where a lot of people get frustrated, so let's take our time. The first one is your member name. This has nothing to do with either your Square Enix account or your PlayOnline account. This is just what you want it to show in the sign-in menu and can effectively be whatever you want. The PlayOnline ID is the ID of your Final Fantasy XI account. This is the randomly generated ID that you were given. It's 4 letters followed by 4 numbers and can be found in your Final Fantasy XI options. The PlayOnline password was the password given to you that you had the option to change for that account. Then you have the member password. This is an optional password that you can set if you're sharing the computer with another person. Then you have the Square Enix ID, which is the username you use to sign into your Square Enix account to access your PlayOnline account. Seriously, yes, there is an account within an account in an account. And as a cherry on top, you can have a one-time password, which you'll probably at least want to set up once, but since this is already incredibly complex, we're just going to deal with that later. Now, when you sign in, you'll be asked for another password. This password is for your Square Enix ID. It's the same one that you inputted here. Yes, I am fully aware that there is absolutely no reason for it to be this complex. But hey, this archaic, frustrating design preventing you from getting to an enjoyable experience is a good litmus test to see if you're gonna enjoy Final Fantasy XI as a whole. So good on Square for that, I guess. After all of that, we're finally in the PlayOnline. At this point, we're doing kind of a victory lap, but just when you think it's over, the boss unleashes its final attack. You have yet another username. Don't worry though, this attack doesn't actually do any damage. This is just what you want to be known as on PlayOnline's social network. Honestly, it's been a while since I really poked around PlayOnline, but it's such an amazing time capsule because it really hasn't changed since the game released in 2002. I mean, seriously, remember when The Bouncer was the hot new game? Remember when Square made Brave Fencer Musashi? Because Square Enix doesn't. It's genuinely worth it to look around and see what the early 2000s social media was like, but at this point you want to get into the game, not spend your time on the launcher. So go ahead and click on that little crystal and you're brought to this menu, click play. Be reminded that MMO addiction was a serious concern back in 2003. Then finally, after what could have been days since you first started your journey, you're finally into Final Fantasy XI. Well, after the version update anyway. And honestly, this menu, as simple as it is, still brings back so many memories. And hopefully it does, or at least will for you as well. Now it's time to finally create your character. You have 5 races to choose from, and if you're coming from 14, they all seem pretty familiar. You have your fairly boring but versatile human stand-ins aptly named Humes. You have the Elvan, which are kinda sorta, but actually not really elves. You have the small in stature and big and bad Taru. The female exclusive catgirl race, the the Mithra. And the huge hulking male exclusive though, technically agender, but primarily masculine identifying, even though they reproduce by reincarnation, Galka. There is no gender alternative for the last two, by the way. Also, you won't find any region differences here either. Pro tip, if you are coming from Final Fantasy XIV, try to use the correct racial names. We Final Fantasy XI grognards are pretty passionate, and some of us are still pretty bitter about the creative direction Final Fantasy XIV had taken. Don't feel the need to stress out too much regarding min-maxing your character with the racial choice. There are some stat variation between races. For example, the Mithra have a touch more dexterity than their clumsy elven counterparts, and at one point these variations might have had some impact, but in 2014 they changed the racial HP and MP bonuses, and honestly by the time you reach the game's max level, the stat differences are negligible at best. So just pick one you feel like you would have the most fun playing. This is one of the few permanent choices in the game though, so don't be like me and pick a Hume. Spend 900 hours of your life playing it, cringing every time you see your avatar in a cutscene, then hide it in some ridiculous goblin costume so you don't have to see it anymore, only to roll a Mithra mule, realize you enjoy that a lot more, and then start questioning a lot of things about your life. Now we get to the character customization, which admittedly there's very little. You're not going to see any sliders or separate hairstyles here. Each race only has 16 choices of models, which turns out to be less because each face has a selection of 2 different hair colors, leaving you with only 8 choices, which is even less than that for the Tartaru because 2 of the choices are just the same, but with more palette swaps. It's like the Chinese bootleg of character customization. Now this might seem like it's extremely limiting because, well, it is. Remember, this was a PlayStation 2 game. Also, remember that Final Fantasy XI was designed back in the day when a 56.6K modem was the norm. It was designed around the hardware limitations at the time. But hey, think of it this way. As soon as you create your character, you already have a ton of fan art created for your OC. The next choice is your starting job selection. You have your choice between warrior, monk, thief, white mage, black mage, and red mage. Which, fun little fact, was the original 6 jobs in the first Final Fantasy. Don't feel the need to buy an engraved ring for this decision though, because you can change your job at any point in your mock house. There will also be a lot more jobs available than these initial 6, though you will have to complete certain quests to unlock those. I plan on going over the intricacies of each job in a later video, but for now, any of these jobs are viable. However, if you're not really sure what you want to do, I would highly suggest Red Mage for a few reasons. The Jack of all trades has access to decent melee skills, a variety of white and black magic, and if you decide to stick with it, it will carry you well into the endgame. Basically, Red Mage gives you the experience of each basic job, allowing you to see if there's any certain aspect you enjoy more than the others, as well as raising the appropriate skills if you do decide to go down another path. As a bonus, Red Mage also gives you access to the all-important sneak and invisible spells. These spells allow you to travel through most of Vana'diel while avoiding mobs. This is incredibly useful, even if you want to use it as a support job. Then we have our name and server selection. Picking your name is another permanent decision, and it can be a bit frustrating to find something that isn't already in use, but I have faith you'll eventually find something. Server selection isn't permanent, but it does cost real money to transfer your characters, so it's best just to pick the one that's right for you from the outset. How do you know which one's best for you? Well, that really depends on what you're looking for in the game. I don't have experience with all the servers, so this is more from my own research and may not be accurate, but here's the general idea. Azura is the most populated server and has the most English-speaking players, both from North America and the EU. Azura is a really good choice if you're wanting to get into the social aspects of the game, especially the end game where it's a lot more difficult to do on your own. It's also the official Final Fantasy XI Reddit server, which gives you the option of asking for help if you're really struggling. You're more likely to meet people and make friends, which is great, but there's also downsides. From what I've heard, Azura is a bit overcrowded. In-game events tend to have a much longer waiting time for instanced fights, camping, farming, and selling may have more competition, and with all that there tends to be an inherent toxicity as well. Odin is the second most populated server, but it's mostly populated by Japanese players. You have some of the issues of Azura as well as the benefits, but notably things won't be nearly as competitive or cramped. The North American and European prime time is less likely to be at peak population hours. However, there is a difficult language barrier to cross, so if you need help with something, or even if you just want to socialize, you're going to run into some issues. But as a bonus, Odin is where I made my home, so if I'm currently playing, you're more than welcome to join my link shell if you find me. Bahamut is the second most English populated server, typically consisting of Azura refugees. Basically for those who prefer a more social community but don't like how overcrowded Azura had become. Its population is considerably less than both Azura and Odin, but it's still healthy during peak hours. This is probably the best choice if you're only available on nights and weekends. Then there are all the other servers, ranging anywhere from small communities to entire ghost towns. That comes with the downsides of an unhealthy player economy and the lack of interaction if you do need help. But if you're interested in playing Final Fantasy XI as a solo experience just for the story, it might turn out to be beneficial to you since there won't be any competition for farming spots. So you picked your server and you're ready to go. And you certainly can if you want. But if you're willing to be just a bit more patient, you might want to pause to consider going to Final Fantasy XI's Reddit or Discord community and ask for a Gold World Pass for your server of choice. Gold World Passes are basically the game's friend referral system. This served a bigger function back in the day when you were randomly assigned a server instead, meaning it was the only way you could actually play with a friend, but now it serves as a way to earn some pretty neat exclusive items. The longer you both subscribe, the more items you get, but even the initial experience boosting ring is a huge boost to ease the grind. Who knows, you might also make a potential friend as well. It is worth it to at least ask, but don't stress out about it if you don't find anyone. With as fast as you gain experience in 11 now, you can make up the difference in about a day. Also, quick note, you just enter your pass from here. If you happen to go into the nation selection screen without having to enter the key, be sure to back out and try again. Finally, there is selecting your nation. Otherwise, choosing your allegiance to one of the 3 nations in the world of Vanadale. This chooses your starting point in the world as well as the initial missions available to you. While at times there might be some ribbing regarding your personal preference of nation, you don't really need to worry about any sort of WoW's alliance versus horde mentality. Final Fantasy XI almost exclusively focuses on player versus environment gameplay. Nation selection is very much a personal choice, and ultimately it might be worth reading into a wiki if you're really interested in the game's lore. However, allow me to make the case for Bastok. Yes, Bastok's industrial stone-hewn setting, surrounded by a desolate landscape, might seem a bit dull and depressing, especially if you compare it to the darkened greens and sharp grays of Sandaoria or the vibrant lands of Windurst. But what Bastok lacks in looks, it more than makes up for in pragmatic designs. See, the Tarutaru have this weird obsession with mazes. As you can tell, their surrounding areas are named the Maze of Shakrami, or the Labyrinth of Anzozo. Going from one end of Windurst to another is this weird navigation of just walking forever through winding roads with basically nothing but an occasional dommel between them. Even with the ability to teleport, it takes forever to get anywhere, let alone find it. Meanwhile, in Sandaoria, not only have to deal with the holier-than-thou attitudes of the Elven, but much like them, their grandiose and expansive designs lack a lot of actual substance. Even worse, despite the genuinely enjoyable music of Ronfar, in the city you have bagpipes blasting through your ears the entire time. Meanwhile, Bastok features a nice, simple-to-navigate design and can be equally as beautiful for its clear blue skies and contrasting oranges. The surrounding Gestaburg area is not one to be unappreciated for its aesthetics, which I talked about in another video which you should totally check out. But, most importantly, it has some really nice hunting grounds, all within an extremely close proximity to the city. You can get to level 30 all within a few zones of Bastok. Join Bastok and come see our bridge, our Cid, our weird cutout rock thing, which I'm pretty sure has lore, and see for yourself why they call us Best Talk. Actually, they call us Last Talk. But hey, at least we'll always have Gusta. Are you freaking kidding me, Sandy? For the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume you made the correct choice. If you didn't, don't worry, the general idea is the same for all nations, but you're gonna be on your own for the grinding. We're gonna take a short break while I get over my disappointment in Bastock. When we come back, we'll finally start our journey in Vanadale. So with character creation done, we're finally in the game. But before you gain control, you're treated to this opening cutscene, which back in 2003 was the only tutorial we had. Seriously, these 3 questions were all you got. They at least direct you to an NPC and give you a ticket to trade to them with a poorly explanation on how to trade. And after all that trouble of spending some time figuring out the menus, the whole process earned you a massive 50 gil, which is basically enough to get nothing, really. Seriously, it's just such a player-hostile design to give a new player so little to get started, but strangely that's kind of endearing to me now. The best thing to do right now is get comfortable with the controls, mess around, and explore the city. Though while you're doing that, the goal should be to activate each of the home points. These little blue crystal things back in the day were really just respawn points, but thankfully now they serve a much better function, acting as warp points to any other home point that you've activated. If you get a bit lost, you do have a map function that shows you where they are, near at the bottom of your menu. If you see a home point flashing, that means you haven't activated it yet. You'll also come across a survival guide which serves a similar function but is used more for traveling to fields and dungeons. But really for now, just savor the moment of experiencing something new. Explore around and take in the sights, because that sense of novelty and wonder is something you really only get once. However, no matter what you do not talk to Ken. Seriously, if there is one thing I can stress enough, it is not to talk to Ken. And I know what you're thinking, just because I called him out specifically as the one person you shouldn't talk to, it makes you want to talk to him even more. Just don't. After some exploring, you've undoubtedly stumbled upon your Mog House. This is your base of operations. The Moogle inside does a good enough job at explaining things, so be sure to take the time to listen. You'll notice how you have quite a few storage options, most of which are darkened out right now, but we're going to tackle the boss fight of inventory management another day. For now, we're going to go take a quick detour and head back to the real world to use the rest of our CD keys for our newbie gear, configure some things, and then get into the real meat of the game. And while you can log out from the game from anywhere, something to note is that if you log out from inside your Mog House, it's instantaneous. Whereas if you quit from anywhere else, there's a 30-second delay which can be interrupted by enemies. Also, while you can quit from the menu, you get the same functionality simply by typing /shutdown. Alright, so we verified Final Fantasy XI runs and works, and we created our character. We revisit the grave of the first boss of the game with the other CD keys to collect our loot. You gain the Destroyer Beret and the Chocobo shirt for your troubles. These 2 items make the early game significantly less difficult, so it is really worth pausing to get them. Just copy the keys like you did your registration key, and we're going to click Add a Service Account. Throw the keys in there, we select the character we created and apply it to them, then pick them up in-game at your local festival Moogle. But before we get back into the game, I'm gonna do you one favor that will make your life in Vanadale so much better. Allow me to introduce you to Windower. Windower is a program that existed back in the day simply because Final Fantasy XI did not play nice with alt-tabbing on a full screen. Windower fixed this by putting it in a window. That functionality had been officially fixed a long time ago, but Windower lives on as a quality of life enhancement, using Lua scripts to add various UIs and functionality. Now, a disclaimer, Windower is technically against the TOS from what I gather, so if you're completely law-abiding or just afraid of potentially being banned, I understand. This step is completely optional. If you are interested, just go to windower.net, download it, and boot it up. From here, it simply acts as an alternative to the official launcher. However, what we're interested in is the add-ons and plugins. There are a lot to choose from, each with their own benefit, and explaining them all is well beyond the scope of this video, so I highly recommend just browsing them when you have time. For now, I'm just going to direct you to 2 very simple plugins. The first is Config, which allows for some minor adjustments, including unlocking 60 frames per second. The other plugin is FFXIDB. This adds a movable mini-map to your UI, which is really useful so you're not having to pause to open the menu every couple of seconds while you're traveling. And before we get booted into the game, it's best to check our configurations. There is the official Final Fantasy XI configuration tool, which allows you to adjust some graphics settings and the option to use a gamepad. I personally use a Steam controller running Windower through Steam as a non-Steam game, but you can use pretty much any X input device without the need for Steam. Note that Windower also has its own configurations that would override what you have in the official config, so just double check to make sure it's the same. With that, we just click the launch button here and it's just like the PlayOnline launcher. Then we get back into the game. So we're back into the game, we picked up our newbie gear, and we're ready for combat. Well, real quick though, let's make some slight adjustments to our configurations in-game. If you installed Windower and the plugins, you'll see we have a nice little mini-map where we can move wherever we want. My preference is right here. To get our 60 FPS, we just type in /config space frame rate divisor 1, and there we go. We're also going to do a few other quality of life adjustments. From our menu, we're going to shift it and head towards the config options. One good thing to do is to set our chat filters. You can avoid certain information being displayed or have it held in the window as other text goes by. Personally, I recommend holding on to party chat, tells, and link shell chat while filtering out any text from NPCs or other non-group players. In the Windows setting, you can choose whether to have the information displayed in 2 separate windows for easier parsing and the look of your windows. In the miscellaneous settings, I prefer to have auto sort turned on, area display which shows your area of effect range, party icons which shows buffs party members have when selected, and timer display which shows the remaining time on your own buffs, all set to on. It's also a good idea to have auto disconnect off just in case you need to step away for an extended period. Otherwise, adjust the rest of the settings to your own personal preference. In your chat, you're also going to want to type /partyinfo space show TP. That way you can see your party members' tactical points in the status window. More on what that is later. With that, there's only a few more things we have to do before we're ready for our first fight. We want to head towards the Bastok Markets exit, but before we head out, we want to speak to a few people. The first of which is this Brigade Model gentleman, or your National Appropriate NPC, as follows. At first, he really doesn't want to discuss anything with you until you set the quest first step forward. To do that, we just go into our second menu, go to Quest, go to Records of Eminence, Tutorial, Basics, then select the aptly named quest. Once you do that, you talk to him and he'll introduce you to Record of Eminence, otherwise known as How I Stopped Complaining on Forums and Learned to Love the Sparks, or simply Sparks for short. Sparks are a currency that is typically earned by completing various in-game objectives, such as defeating so many enemies in a certain area, farming for certain item drops, dealing so much damage, and so on. You can in turn spend these sparks here to buy beginner gear and items, instead of depending on the exorbitant cost of NPCs or probably the lack of gear on the auction house. You won't have much to spend, but feel free to grab an upgrade for your sword and shield for your red mage if you aren't satisfied with your onion dagger. The second person we want to speak to is this Galka named Goldago, or the appropriate NPC shown here if you chose the other places. He provides his own quick tutorial explaining a few of the game's mechanics, but it's typically worth to do it just because it grants us a few useful items for later. The first thing he does is have us grab Signet, which provides us with some minor benefits and earns another currency called campaign points. Our reward for doing that is some meat jerky, food that gives us a little boost to our damage. With our food effect active, he sends us outside to train up our weapons a bit. And now, after all that preparation, we're finally ready to get into the game's combat. Head back to Bastok Mines and step outside the game's gate, and you're ready to kill your first innocent creature and become a real murder hobo. Almost. Just before we do that, we're going to open up our quest menu and start looking at the objectives again. Specifically, we're going to want to select Undertake an FOV training, Heal without using magic, and Vanquish one enemy, all found within the newly populated basic tutorial. Then we're going to want to go under Combat and select Vanquish multiple enemies, deal 10 to 20 points of damage, total damage 1, total damage taken 1, total weapon skills 1. Then in combat spoils, we're going to select wind crystals and earth crystals. In spoils 2, we want honey, flintstones, and zinc ore. And finally, in the combat region, we're going to go under original areas 2 and select South Gustaberg. We're also going to want to check this floating book standing right beside the entrance. This is FOV, or Fields of Valor, which allow you to set objectives for certain enemies you're going to fight, which after meeting those objectives you get some experience, some tabs, which are another form of currency, and a little bit of gil. Select page 1, which tells us to go kill 6 members of the bee family, set it to repeat, and you're good to go. Now, after all of that,
let's slaughter some bees.
Combat in Final Fantasy XI during the time of its release was a huge step beyond your typical turn-based style that the series had been known for. It's funny to think that this was actually a huge point of contention for the game, but really this is the grandfather of the action-based combat the series has now. If you played Final Fantasy XIV, or more contemporary Final Fantasy XII, this will all seem very familiar. To attack your enemies, simply select your target, press the confirm button to open up the combat menu, and select attack. Your character will automatically lock onto the target, draw their weapon, and if in close enough proximity, will auto-attack at a frequency that depends on the delay of the weapon. The rules are the first guy to die loses. However, you're a red mage and you have more than just weapons. You also have spells. You would think you would have Cure as your first spell, but it was Dia! Dia, or Dia, is a debuff that deals minor damage over time like a poison, as well as lowering an enemy's defense, so it's a good idea to use it every battle. If you haven't already, you can either go to your items from the main menu, or from the combat menu and use the scroll, and your character will permanently have the spell for any job that can use it. To use the spell, go to your combat menu and select magic, select the spell, then target the target. The enemy can be quite some distance away, not even engaged yet, so it's best often to pull them using the spell and start combat with Dia rather than try to cast it mid-combat. Getting damaged while casting a spell risks it being interrupted. Our goal here is to learn our first weapon skill, which requires our weapon skill to be at least level 5. You notice as you're fighting, almost every action you take will increase a skill by a few points. As you hit, your weapon skill increases. As you get hit, you might notice your evasion, parrying, and blocking increases. As you cast Dia, your enfeebling skill increases, and so on. Another fun fact, this is actually an homage to Final Fantasy II's leveling system, which had foregone traditional experience points in favor of skills leveling individually. Anyway, once our weapon skill hits level 5, we unlock our first weapon skill. To activate it, we go into our combat menu, select abilities, then to weapon skills, and then select it, then our target. Then wha-bam! Now, with weapon skills, you can't just use them whenever. You need tactical points, at least 1,000 of them. TP is that blue meter beneath your HP and MP, and you get them when you successfully hit an enemy or when you take damage. You can hold up to 3,000 TP, and the more you have when you use your weapon skill, you will gain more potent effects, such as more damage or another effect that the weapon skill has. But for now, it's better to just use it when you have it, rather than wait for a full charge. Anyway, you'd be normally ready for the next part, but you're sick of tutorials and this isn't a speedrun, so just kill till your heart's content. Mainly you want to focus on worms and bees since they're the easiest targets, and they give us the drops we need to complete our Sparks quest, which in turn gives us bonus Sparks and experience. It's best to stick around until you reach at least level 5. The enemies immediately outside the gate though are a bit weak, and you might notice you gain less and less experience from them. If we make a journey to the west, you'll encounter tougher variants that provide a bit more experience. Just be careful about traveling too far west or you'll be participating in the age-old Final Fantasy XI tradition of taking a dirt nap. To avoid meeting with a terrible fate, it's best to check an enemy before engaging them. With the target selected, go into your combat menu and select check, and it will tell you the enemy's strength in comparison to yours. Too weak means the enemy is so weak you won't gain any experience for defeating it. Easy prey means it's several levels below you, but defeating it will provide a nominal amount of experience. Decent challenge means it's a few levels below you and will provide some experience. Even match is equal to your level and provides standard experience. Tough is a level or two above you and will give you a little bit more experience. Very tough is a few levels above you and will provide increased experience. And incredibly tough is several levels above you and will provide experience up to a cap. That is, assuming you can even defeat it. If you defeat enemies even match or above in quick succession, you even gain more experience due to a chain bonus, but for now that's likely not going to be possible on your lonesome. For now, it's best to avoid any enemies that are very tough or above. That is, unless you have a party to back you up. After you reach level 5, feel free to head back home, tell them the good news, and not only learn how synthing works, which we're not going to do until much later if at all, but after checking out the auction house for him, he gives you a coupon for an experience point boosting ring, which is especially useful if you didn't get one from the Gold World Pass. You have your choice between a Chariot, Empress, and Emperor band. Now, the Galco will tell you differently, but you almost always want to choose the Empress band in this case. Finally, since we're already level 5, we automatically complete his quest and get another useful item, the Raising Earring. Our newbie gear provides us with a re-raise effect automatically, but this can be useful later, so hold on to it. After that, Goldego will want us to head towards Kronstadt Highlands, or your region equivalent, but we're going to hold off on that journey now because we have money to make. Now, before you run down to the auction house to sell your stack of crystals, the early game of Final Fantasy XI doesn't quite work like that anymore. You know all those sparks we've been earning? Well, not only do we use that to equip ourselves, but we're going to use those to fund our early game. When you buy gear, you can also sell what you buy to one of the nearby shop NPCs for gil. This Sparks to Gil conversion, if you're diligent enough, can earn you just under 1,000,000 gil a week before you hit the cap. Sparks are usually earned with a 10-to-1 gil ratio, so if you find yourself strapped for gil, just buy the most expensive item you can and sell it to the shop, which is typically going to be the Archeon shield found in the item's 70 to 98 spot. The limit for Sparks resets at Japanese midnight on Sunday, so if you have leftover Sparks, it's almost always best to unload them the night before. However, there will be times where you don't want to convert them to gil. You know our combat and magic skills? Even now you might notice that some might lag behind, not quite reaching the cap for your level. At lower levels it isn't as noticeable, but at higher levels you might be 20 or 30 levels behind the cap, because as a red mage it's hard to keep up with all your skills. That's where the skill books come in. These items allow you to automatically gain a skill up when used, which are going to be useful for closing that gap, especially at higher levels. But for now, convert some Sparks into a couple of thousand in gil, and head towards the magic shop to buy a few new spells. Now, Bastok is in last place in Conquest, which it, usually is. Your spell selection might be a little limited, but it should be enough to get you by. Now, you might be ready to throw some rocks at some more bees at this point, but Final Fantasy XI is an MMO. It was ultimately designed with playing with other players in mind, but as you might have noticed, you're likely not finding anyone around your level. Continuing to grind alone at this point is going to be slow going, so we're going to go ahead and earn your trust. Trust are basically the NPC party members that you can summon into your party that help in filling the gaps for certain roles to essentially create your own party without the need for other players. It's nowhere near the same experience as playing with other players, but it does do a good enough job at giving you an idea of how the party dynamics work. Head to Port Bastok near the exit and talk to this Galka here, Clarion Star, or your nation's appropriate NPC here. He'll ask you to be part of the Trust Initiative, and then tell you to find a certain NPC, Naji in this case. Head to the Metalworks and speak with him and he'll give you his trust. You can't cast him inside a town, so head back out to Port Bastok, head out the gate to North Gustaberg, and then cast him by selecting him under your Trust magic, after remembering to set the appropriate Summoning an Alter Ego quest. Head back to the Metalworks and tell him what a disappointment he was, and just like that, you've unlocked the ability to summon Trust. If you set the quest, you should also now have a scroll. You can't use it like you would a spell, but if you take it to the appropriate Trust NPC, you'll be able to use that character as a Trust. You'll notice you have a new objective in your quest as well to summon that character, and completing that quest earns you another Trust scroll on another quest. It is a bit tedious to do it, but it's worth just doing it for the other Trust, and hey, you're getting paid to do it in Sparks and Experience, so might as well. You'll earn other Trust as you play the game, and there are over 100 Trust, each with its own unique set of abilities and priorities. So, as they say, gotta catch them all. You're almost ready to be turned loose into the world of Vana'diel once again, but we're gonna go back to the Bastok Market Gates one last time to join a Unity. We speak to this finely green-clad gentleman here next to the Sparks NPC, and he'll tell us to set up another quest. Do so, talk to him again, and he'll give you the option to join a Unity, which is basically I guess you could say a fan club for an NPC? There is more to it than that, but that's not really pertinent at the moment. The more important aspect is that joining a Unity grants you access to more Sparks objectives and an exclusive trust, some of which are the best in the game. There are a few choices, but your best bet is to pick either a Peruru or Yoran. Both are healing-focused trusts that will stay away from enemies and do a pretty good job at managing their MP compared to the other trust. A Peruru has a better selection of spells and access to haste later, whereas Yoran grants you damage reduction after healing, but really either choice is good. You won't unlock these trusts right away, but you'll gain access to them after doing a few Unity objectives. Joining a Unity also now allows you to earn accolades, which is another form of currency, but right now you don't need to worry about those. With all of that done, you're finally set up to explore the surrounding areas at your leisure. You're welcome to do quests for NPCs with admittedly outdated rewards, try experimenting with other job choices, and of course, going to areas that you're totally underleveled to go to and taking a dirt nap. All this should be enough to get you started, however, the game is only just starting. In the next entry of gaining experience, we're taking a deeper dive into Vana'diel. Join me next time where we learn the basics of party dynamics, explain more of the game's surprisingly deep combat system, get into some of the game's main stories, unlock our support jobs, advanced jobs, and explore the farthest reaches of Vana'diel. Until next time, this is SoberDwarf reminding you that gaining experience builds character. Thanks for watching. This video has been a long time coming, about a year in the works, and there is plenty more after this, so if you're interested, you know what to do. This is different than my usual videos, so let me know what you think in the comments, but don't worry, my usual analytical style videos aren't going anywhere. This is just for the people who voted it for Subscriber Appreciation Month. And as always, a special thank you to the wonderful people who support the channel financially. I seriously couldn't do this without them. Stay safe, and I'll hopefully see you in Vana'diel.